Let's dive in. So what I'm going to do is I have some slides. I'm going to go through the slides. I'm going to show you the 5 steps to get to psychological safety. I'm going to show you some very specific things that you can do with your teams. All of the kind of things that I'm going to be talking about, there's templates. It's all in the resources. You don't have to take pictures. You're going to have links at the end of this. I'm going to try to save time for questions. Because we'll have like Stump Dan and say like, all right, Dan, you think you're so smart on psychological safety. What would you do in this situation? And then together, we'll all kind of figure out how to help that person and that team get to a better state, a more effective place where they have that trust, that psychological safety. Do I have chocolate on my face now that I had all that milk does? I'm just picturing I have chocolate all over my face, so hopefully I don't. Just in case, I'm gonna wipe my mouth. All right, sponsors. That's me. I am an instructor at Pragmatic. We'll tell you more about that. But let's dive into the topic. So psychological safety is the feeling that anyone can share an idea, admit a mistake, offer up, a suggestion without feeling like they're going to be judged or looked down upon by their team. And it is really, really crucial for effective teams. So how do we know it's so crucial? Well, Google did a very comprehensive study. This study lasted over 2 years. They studied 180 different teams at Google. And they interviewed executives, they interviewed team leads, they interviewed individual contributors. They did surveys and they looked at demographic data. And they found that there was 5 factors that led to productive and effective teams at Google. And we've listed the 5 things out here, but you'll notice that the #1 factor for highly successful teams at Google, and I would say this applies to almost any other area, is psychological safety. The feeling that team members could take risks and that would be okay. And that, even if their risks or their ideas or whatever they offered up resulted in failure. So we're going to talk through the different steps to how to set up psychological safety on your team. But really quickly, let's just kind of do like a quick assessment. Who has been on a team where there's high psychological safety? Where does anyone, all right, now, did anyone on those high psychological safety teams, how would you describe that? Was it fun working on that team? Did you love that? Just so people are nodding their heads. When you get into that state, it's great. You look forward to it. You love working with your team, but it's not easy to get there. You can do it. Sometimes you start in a bad place, but if you go through these steps and you constantly work at making sure that you're prioritizing the psychological safety, you're going to build more effective teams. So the first thing you need to do is make sure everybody understands that it is a major priority and that you have to get on board with this. It's not that hard to get people to buy into psychological safety. I mean, if you want to love your job, have more fun working, be productive, be more successful, have more impact, well, this is the key to doing it. So it's not hard. You don't get a lot of people being like, psychological safety sucks. People want this. They want to experience this. So there's a lot of frameworks, there's a lot of methodologies out there, and I've done a lot of research over the years. The one that I have found that I really like the best is this book called The Psychological Safety Playbook. So this is in the resources section. I have different books I'm going to be referring to. This is a really great one. It's short, you can whip through it. I like the high-level steps that they have. I'm going to go into each section and kind of put my own spin on them, but this is a really great book to check out. So let's go to step 1, which is communicating courageously. And what do we mean by communicate courageously? Well, the first thing you need to do is make sure that you are opening up and making sure that other viewpoints are being heard. What you want to avoid is groupthink. You guys ever experience that where everyone's just like, oh yeah, that works, and you don't really have fun, constructive debate about how to solve problems or how to tackle different situations? So teams should be striving for this continuous learning. So that means like, all right, we've tried it this way, how might we do it better? So always reflecting and figuring out, all right, how can we continue to challenge ourselves to get better, to deliver better results, to have better outcomes for the business and our customers. One good way to do this, and you do not need to be like the leader of the team to do this, is to show vulnerability. And one, I put up there, I actually have my Corbin mug up here. So now my name is Dan Corbin. So why does the Corbin on my coffee mug? Well, when I was leading product managers at HEB, I wanted to make sure that they knew it was okay if they messed up, even if they really failed big time. So I have an alter ego named Dan Corbin. So it's my idiotic alter ego. So whenever I did something really dumb, not uncommon, I would talk about my Corbin moment. And we incorporated that into our weekly meetings where you could just say like, oh, I had a Corbin moment. Like check out what I did. So it was a way for people to just offer up and be vulnerable and admit they made mistakes in a very safe way. And then we figured out, all right, well, what did you learn from that? What is something by you sharing your failure? How can you help avoid other people making the same failures going forward? So don't be afraid to laugh at yourself. Don't take yourself too seriously. Now, I want to talk specifically about this communicating courageously, especially for product managers. If you are a product manager or if you are a product professional, you absolutely have to be an honest broker. Product managers, we're not the bosses of people. We have to use our influence in our communications, in our persuasions, in our business cases to get people to buy into what we're doing. So as a product manager, you may be overseeing the decisions you make may impact what 25, 30 different people are doing over courses of months. But you probably don't oversee, you're not the boss of anyone. You can't just tell them, hey, you have to go do this. You have to get them on board. And if you don't have credibility, and if you aren't seen as an honest broker, if you're telling one group one thing and then having a different messaging for someone else, going to the executives and saying like, listen, this engineering team, they just don't know how to do it. They don't really understand, their velocity sucks. And then going to the engineering team and being like, these executives, right, they suck. This strategy blows. Like, listen, I understand you guys. You can't be two-faced like that. You absolutely have to be an honest broker. You have to deliver hard truths to both the engineers, the executives, and all of your different stakeholders. Because if you aren't seen as an honest broker, you're gonna lose that credibility, you're gonna lose any sort of effectiveness. So if you want to be trusted, you have to be honest, even if that means delivering the harsh truth. All right, step 2, mastering the art of listening. So if you want to be heard, the first step that you need to do is listen and really actively listen. So what do we mean by that? Well, the first thing is realizing that, you don't have the full truth. You may not have all of the data. You're gonna bring biases into the situation. You're gonna make assumptions based upon your previous experience or knowledge or whatever it is. You're gonna have blind spots. And it kind of reminds me of that kind of fable where they blindfolded people and had them try to figure out what the elephant was. The first person touches the trunk and is like, oh my gosh, I think it's a giant snake. Meanwhile, someone's grabs the tail and be like, I think it's just a piece of rope. I don't know what you're freaking out about over there. Meanwhile, someone's touching the side, you're like, dudes, this is just a wall. And then someone else is touching the leg and you're like, pretty sure this is a tree trunk. Now, all those people were being honest, but all of them had a very limited perspective. So you need to recognize, hey, I'm only bringing part of the picture to the table. We need to work together to see that full picture, or the whole elephant, if you will. So it's especially true for product managers, but I think for anyone, to be really effective, you need to be empathetic. And listening is an empathy skill. So making sure that people feel heard. Once they feel heard, they're gonna be much more likely to listen to your side. And that's what's gonna lead to constructive debate, and then you're gonna get to a point where you can decide and commit. The other thing is, once you actively listen, repeat back, tell them, oh, that's interesting. So what I'm hearing you say is, so if I got this right, and then if you get something wrong, allow them to correct you. If you model that behavior, it should be reciprocated to you. And again, it's going to just result in much more effective discussions for everybody. The third step is managing your reaction. So some of us are better at this than others. Like, I'm generally a pretty laid back dude, pretty happy-go-lucky, but I used to lose my shit at work, like a lot. And I realized that part of it was I was getting really defensive. So once I realized, oh, I'm getting defensive, I could be like, all right, now I can label that and say like, all right, now, instead of being defensive, instead of like snapping, instead of just coming back and be like, well, that's idiotic, and let me tell you why, I can actually go through and think about some constructive responses. And we're gonna talk more about the constructive responses on the next slide. But really being able to label your emotions and say like, oh, okay, this is me, I'm getting upset, I'm getting worked over something, and this is not the hill I wanna die on. Let's see if we can actually drive this conversation in a more effective way. You also need to ask yourself, what stories am I telling myself? Again, because you don't have the full perspective. You don't see the entire picture. There's probably things you don't know. So you need to assume positive intent. Like, I'm not gonna assume like Ian, he's just saying that because he just wants to get under my skin. No, like Ian probably, this is what his data and what his experiences are telling him. So when you are challenged, especially if you are a leader, if you're challenged, make sure that you show appreciation for that. Because if you're in a situation, have you guys ever had that where a manager, like nobody would want to, like, oh, well, once the manager said that, we don't ever challenge it. I mean, if you've been in that situation, you know that that's not an effective team. And that's just not a fun place to work. So, again, you don't want to have that. So managing your reaction. I want to give some tips for managing reactions. The first thing is making sure you have constructive responses. Things like, I appreciate you speaking up, or tell me more about that. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it. I hadn't looked at it that way. That's going to drive the discussion in a much more effective way. Now, you also need to resist the urge to kill bad ideas. So one of the things that I teach in my design classes is this concept of ideation and evaluation. The one thing that, if you really just want to shut down creativity, if you want to shut down discussion and just like bring a meeting to a grinding halt, just crush everyone's ideas. So even if somebody says something that, and you're thinking in your mind, that's a terrible idea, I bet you there's 10% of that idea that is actually worth exploring. So rather than just shutting it down, and at that point, if you shut down someone's idea and just completely disregard it out of hand, no one else is going to want to offer up their ideas. It's going to absolutely eliminate any further creativity. So instead, use the yes and method, which is something they do in improv. Say, you know what? Actually, the one thing what I really like about that idea is, and figure out what can you build off of. That's going to keep the discussion and the communications going in a very effective direction. This is a really big one, embracing risk and failure. Have you guys ever felt like you're afraid to fail at work? That is the one thing I never wanted any of my product managers to feel. Because if they feared failure, then I knew like, all right, this is not gonna end up good. We're gonna end up with very tepid decisions. Our decision velocity is gonna go down in the tank, and just gonna have a lot of bad repercussions from that. So I wanted to normalize failure and understand, we can't predict the future. We're not perfect. We probably haven't done this thing before. So you know what? Things are going to go wrong. We're going to mess up. And that's okay. That's totally fine. When things fail, though, you need to understand that they are an opportunity for learning. So, okay, we messed up on that. Do regular check-ins, reflect as a team. Retros are a great way to do that. What did we learn? How can we improve going forward? And then make sure that you're celebrating when you do learn. Be like, you know what, that was pretty bad, but it could have been even worse if we hadn't done X, Y, or Z. So understand that those are actually moments to celebrate. And again, model the behavior. You do not need to be like the leader of the group to start implementing these psychological safety changes. If you show a vulnerability, if you admit your mistakes, and if you lead with that, that is going to allow others to do that. Now, some people feel like, I'm afraid to do that because I don't want my, coworkers or my boss to look down on me. It's actually the opposite. Studies show people who show that vulnerability, who admit when they make mistakes, are actually held in higher regard. It's absolutely true. So, you know what? If you want to, be respected at work, admit when you messed up. share what you learned, and then help others avoid making the same mistake. So one tip for normalizing failure is just to talk about, all right, when a failure inevitably happens, what are we going to do? One way to do that is the pre-mortem. So just a quick raise of hands. Who here has actually conducted a pre-mortem before? Few people, yeah, it's good. It's a really helpful tool. So if you're not familiar with it, what you do is you take whatever goal it may be. Like say you're building out your plans for the next quarter. You project out, you go to the end of the quarter, theoretically, you jump ahead, and then you look back and you assume that everything failed and the projects went miserable. You didn't hit any of your milestones. You didn't get any of the epics done. You had no outcomes. Tell me all of the reasons why that went wrong. So there's lots of different steps. The first step is you detail the plan. This is what we're trying to accomplish. Step 2 is you have a brainstorming session of doom. This is a very safe environment where everybody can just talk about anything that could go wrong. And it isn't like we're gonna be like, oh, Erica, well, she's probably gonna mess this up. That's not how it goes. What could happen is like, well, what if, what if we lose a team member? Or what if it turns out that we aren't able to integrate with that API, whatever it may be. And it's a very safe way for the team to look at where things could go off the rails, because we all naturally have a tendency at the beginning of a project or the beginning of a new problem that we're trying to solve to just be overly optimistic. This kind of brings you and kind of grounds you in the reality. Step 3 is you start to organize. We're like, all right, great, we did this brainstorming session of doom. We have 75 different ways that things might go wrong. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of do some affinity mapping and group them. What are the 2 to 4 big things that might go wrong? Oh, there we go. From there, you're gonna rank the risks. You're gonna say, all right, what is the probability that this is gonna happen? What is the impact? If you get something that lands in the red zone, you need to actively start mitigating that right away. If you get something that's in the orange zone, you need to have contingency plans ready to go for if that issue comes up. If it's in the yellow zone, you need to at least start to thinking about, all right, how would we respond in that case? And then if it's the green zone, I refer to that as the YOLO zone. Like, it's probably not gonna happen. Even if it did, it's not that big a deal, we can go. After that, then you can say like, all right, well, based upon this analysis, how do we wanna strengthen our plan? How do we wanna change it? I've seen teams that have looked at quarterly plans and been like, we wildly overestimated what we could get done. We have way more risks. And you know what? There's a high chance that we could fail. Let's adjust accordingly. I've seen where teams have said, you know what? We feel pretty good. We think we're gonna crush this, and we've actually done the analysis, so we could actually commit a little bit more. And I've also seen where teams were like, great, we nailed it. But it's a great way just to talk about inevitably, what do you do when things fail? Now the 5th step, and this is really where you start to get into how do I implement this, is you need to design inclusive rituals. So here are just some simple things that you could do. So you could appoint an inclusion facilitator. That might be you, maybe you delegate that to somebody else. What they're gonna do is they're gonna monitor speaking times. They're gonna make sure that people aren't being interrupted. They're gonna be, you guys ever hear of, one of the issues I had on a team that I had my facilitator fix was heap heating. Are you guys familiar with this concept of heap heating? So what it is when a woman on the team makes a suggestion, and then a guy on the team goes, you know what we should do? And then makes the exact same suggestion. Because we had a large team of guy engineers, and at one point it was all guys, and so we tackled that. We said, so this is what's happening. And we talked to them and we coached and we made sure hey, this is part of our psychological safety. We want everyone to feel and make sure that they are being heard. And that was the job of the inclusion facilitator. Now, at that particular company, it was a student of mine that I had him in class, I hired him. And he actively did this role. And he also, sometimes we had to have a no interruptions rule because we had teams that were very animated. Everyone wanted to get their opinion in. So we made sure we eliminated interruptions. You could just say, you know what, why don't we say nobody speaks twice until everybody speaks once? Now, I probably could come up with another dozen bullet points for how to get people to feel involved. because some people aren't going to want to get up and have to speak and, articulate their deepest thoughts in front of the group. Sometimes you want to gather things in writing. There's lots of ways that you could do it, but you need to make sure that everybody has a chance to contribute and their contributions are valued and that people demonstrate. Like, that is a really good idea. I hadn't thought of that. Thank you for sharing. So how do you track the psychological safety of the team? I think it's really important. Like, I love being metrics driven, be data driven. This isn't something that is some nebulous thing. You can actually get this down into numbers. So the first thing I would recommend doing, and again, I have a template, you can actually go, there's a Google form, you can copy it. There's a 10 questions psychological safety evaluation that you can give your team. And it dives into different aspects of team dynamics, and you can figure out, all right, well, based upon these results, now let's focus on these areas to make sure that we're establishing that psychological safety. Maybe management doesn't feel, maybe the individual contributors don't feel like management is hearing them, or maybe one person is dominating the conversation too much, whatever it may be. That'll give you the baseline. And then periodically you go back and you take that assessment again, maybe once every 6 months. But what do you do in between? I don't think giving this assessment every other week would really be helpful. So what would you do in the meantime? Well, another thing you could do is implement the happiness metric. What this is, it's a way for you to gather honest feedback from your team about how they're feeling on different levels. The first question is, on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest, how do you feel about your role on the team? Some people will be like, 5, it's great, I love it, I get to pair with these people. Other people might be, well, 1, I've been stuck on this one project forever. And so this is a way to easily gain feedback on how they're feeling. Then you'll say, well, on the same scale, how are we doing as a team? How are we communicating? How are we treating each other? Are we optimizing? Are we really hitting our potential? And then finally, how do you feel about our company? Because again, you want to make sure that everybody, that they know what their individual contributions are doing to drive the success of the company. So you want to drive that alignment, and using this metric is a way to do that. So once you gather those first 3 questions, then you say, all right, well, what's one thing that we could do over the next 2 weeks? Now, I use sprint here, whatever, if you're using sprints, it's great, but whatever, time frame you want. What's one thing that we could do to improve those scores? And I promise you, if you track and say, all right, okay, great, we've narrowed down to these 2 things. Over the next 2 weeks, we're gonna focus on how we can improve those. And then you start your next retro by saying, all right, hey, as a reminder, here are the 2 things that we said we were gonna try to improve. How did we do? Now, you don't have to be the one that's in charge of doing all of those, but you can delegate and say all right, great, you're gonna take care of this, you're gonna take the lead on this, and at the next sprint, you're gonna tell us how we're doing on that. It may be hey, we need to stop breaking our deployment pipeline because it's slowing us down. Or you know what? We haven't done anything fun as a team. Can we schedule a happy hour or an event or something? Now, again, you should track this. So this is one of my teams. They tracked their happiness metrics, and you can see, you had red was for the company, and then you had green was how the team was doing, and then individuals were in blue. And you can see the underlying trend lines all went up because, we were taking that information and actually acting on it. And when things dropped down, I could go as a leader and go to the management, hey, this is what's really bothering the team. So I was driving alignment between from the executives all the way down to the individuals. You can also use a working agreement. A working agreement just basically, it's hey, how do we want to treat each other? What is a code of conducts? How do we want to communicate? How do we want to communicate with each other? How do we want to operate as a team? Because it really should be. Now, this is something, again, we have templates for this, but this isn't something you can fill out and then foist upon your team. You need to talk to your team, figure out how do you guys want to work? How are you going to help keep yourself accountable? Because in exchange for that accountability, they should get autonomy. They should be able to work the way that they feel that they work best in exchange for actually delivering some outcomes. All right, I didn't quite get there as fast as I wanted, but we have lots of questions. Yes, let's go down and talk to Karen Kelvey. She's got a question here. Karen, what is your question?
What do you do when someone is heap-eating, especially if it's your female manager?
Yeah, so again, I think that you have to be able to have honest conversations and just say, I actually have been corrected. I've tried to be like the one that's the inclusions facilitator, but I've been called out on it. And I was like, thank you so much. I didn't even realize that. So I think it's something important. And maybe if you've been the one that was, heated, maybe if you're not comfortable going with her, maybe you ask a peer of hers to talk about it. But I think it's something that you need to be able to openly discuss. Now, if she gets defensive, that's where, we need to kind of work as a group to be like, hey, you have to appreciate when you're challenged like that, because you're trying to make things better for the group.
On a happiness metric, are you anonymizing the results?
Yes.
So how do you ever know if there's like somebody on the team that's just extremely unhappy?
So I would advise anonymizing the results, offering people a chance to, say who wants to share what they thought. And at first, sometimes and then I would offer up what I said, or I would meet with someone ahead of time and be like, all right, hey, Krista, when we get to that, can you just share what you'd have, get the discussion going? So sometimes you do need to have the meeting before the meeting to make sure that the meeting is effective. But over time, that's going to be normalized. And also, this helps, but you also need to kind of understand when things aren't being said. Read the dynamics of the room. And, you may say, hey, did you know so-and-so was really disengaged? Or when we brought up this topic, somebody really started to get uncomfortable. That's when you say, hey, let's try to follow up in our one-on-one. So either their manager, or if you're a product manager, meet with your engineers once a month. You should only be able to have that one-on-one time to gather that feedback. Yes, more questions. I know you don't need a microphone, so go for it.
So you talk about program managers and product managers, but in teams, you mention a lot about the leader.
I didn't mention about the leader? Yeah.
You can do all these great things as a manager, but if you have a team leader that's, not a good leader, none of this is going to make, give you a trust. What happens if the guy or girl working your team is a lack of no leadership?
Yeah. So we had that at my company, and their happiness metrics of the team was really bad, and their bosses and the team wasn't effective. So eventually we went in and we dug in, we interviewed, we talked to people, and we realized, and we went back to that person and we said, hey, this is the feedback that we're getting on your leadership style. We want to help you grow with that. And you know what the person did? They're like, you know what? They're right. And I don't like being a manager. And I want to go back to being an IC. So again, we addressed it head on. And you know what? That person, once they went back to just being an individual team member, way happier, way happier. Yes? Thanks.
I don't need the mic. The question on the risk assessment when you have a team that you're trying to get to take more risks, while you have the management team. So you're basically in the middle. You have the management team expecting the team to achieve certain certainty.
Yep.
Right? How do you manage that balance between pushing the team to be free to get more risk while maintaining the expectations of the executive?
So if you are responsible for telling the team's story and really talking about their successes and their failures, then there's a few things that you could do. I do think using metrics like the happiness metric helps. I also think make sure you're tracking their velocity, showing how they're doing. Help the the bosses understand what the challenges that the team is facing, what they're doing well, where they need to improve, and how the executives can help you. Part of being if you're kind of in that middle, a lot of your job is managing up, because a lot of the teams, so you notice in the happiness metric, how do you feel about the company was in there? If people feel disconnected from the overall strategy and they don't feel like they have any impact or meaning or real association with what the company is trying to accomplish, they're going to be disengaged. That's going to hurt psychological safety. So the reason I included in the happiness metric is, again, that's going to help you tell the story of what's happening and how the leadership can help you help the team. Yes?
What tips do you have for getting teams to work together effectively
specifically when they're in opposing time zones and have very limited time to meet
Yep.
virtually.
So it can be really challenging. All of these things still apply to remote teams. However, you need to even kind of go a little bit further. You need to do a little bit more individual research, reaching out to people. You need to maybe try to do things in an asynchronous way to get people more involved and make it more fun. And so when we had teams in like India, we used to kind of have different fun surveys and polls and just things to get people feel more connected. And a lot of times, because we had like sometimes a language barrier, when we did have those meetings where everyone was together, we would make sure to send them an agenda ahead of time. This is what we're going to be covering. We would love specifically to hear your feedback on these things. And even though that they were consultants, we wanted to make sure that they knew that, hey, your input matters here and is valued. So we would give them time to be able to prepare, not just put them on the spot and be like, what do you guys think? They're not going to be prepared. So. All right, Erica, and then we'll go back to Shelley.
What would you do if your leadership would see it not a priority or fluff?
Yeah. If the leadership, if you don't get that buy-in, that's like one of the first slides I have is like you have to make psychological safety a priority. You know, what I would do is I would probably bring them all of the different studies. You know, the Google Aristotle study is one, but there's many others that show, hey, if you really want us to get these results, we need to establish the psychological safety. So I'd probably treat it like a business case and be like, hey, I want to improve the overall performance of the team. This is one way you can do it. And this psychological safety, just implementing a few things. You can't just be like, great, we got a working agreement. Now we're going to be psychologically safe. You have to work. There's going to be, like Karen mentioned, there's going to be situations we're going to have crucial conversations. Like that's one of the books in the resources. Crucial conversations. You're going to have those hard conversations in order to establish this, because it's very easy for one person to just, damage the safety of the entire team. So you have to have that buy-in. Or like now, again, I have seen where like psychological safety hasn't been a priority of upper management, but team leaders have made it a priority. And then people are like, what's going on with that team over there? They just seem like they're having so much more fun and they seem to get so much more done. People start to ask questions. So again, you don't need to be the leader. You don't need to be the one that makes all the decisions just to help make this change. Are we done? We're done. Let's get to some drawings, right? All right, thanks everyone.